Hello everyone, I'm here to present to you Draft Addendum 2 to the Red Drum Interstate Fishery Management Plan, modifying red drum management. In this presentation, I will start off by providing an overview of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission before moving into talking about Draft Addendum 2. I will provide information on the addendum's timeline, background, and then I'll walk through each of the proposed management options. So starting with background on the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission itself, the commission was formed in 1942 as an interstate compact between the 15 Atlantic coast states from Maine through Florida. And the commission is a deliberative forum for those states coordinating management for species in state waters, which is 0 to 3 miles from shore. While each state is represented on the commission by 3 commissioners, each state gets 1 vote in its decision-making process. Within the commission, red drum falls under the purview of the Cyanids Management Board. The Cyanids Management Board consists of commissioners from the states New Jersey through Florida, and also includes representatives from the Potomac River Fisheries Commission, PRFC, and the National Marine Fisheries Service. On this slide, I have the timeline for this draft addendum. So back in October 2024, the Cyanids Board approved the benchmark stock assessment for management use and tasked the Red Drum Technical Committee, which is an ASMFC committee with representation from state biologists from all the states that sit on the board, with some analyses to help the board decide next steps. In May 2025, the Cyanids Board reviewed that analysis that was completed by the technical committee and initiated the draft addendum. After which a planned development team was formed and met several times this summer to develop the addendum. And then on October 5th, last month, the Cyanids Board approved this document for public comment. Final action on the draft addendum, where the Cyanids Board selects options, will occur at the annual meeting in late October 2025. So moving on to some general background information, Atlantic Coast Red Drum are currently managed under Amendment 2 to the Commission's Red Drum Interstate Fishery Management Plan, which was approved back in 2002. This new management document would be an addendum to Amendment 2. In Amendment 2, the management area of red drum is the entire Atlantic coast distribution of the resource from the east coast of Florida through New Jersey. The management area is divided into a southern region and a northern region. So in this presentation, when I'm talking about the southern region, I'm referring to the Atlantic coast of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. And the northern region extends from the North Carolina-South Carolina border north through New Jersey. In the 2024 benchmark stock assessment that I briefly previously mentioned, the southern and northern regions were assessed separately because they are 2 separate stocks of red drum. The southern region red drum stock was found to be overfished and experiencing overfishing, and the northern region red drum stock was found to be not overfished and not experiencing overfishing. However, the assessment did observe a trend in increasing red drum mortality from fishing effort in the northern region. Amendment 2 also established the biological reference points of red drum, and biological reference points are used to determine the status of the stock, such as whether it's overfished or overfishing is occurring. Specific biological reference points defined in Amendment 2 are focused on the fishing mortality rate. First, it defines the overfishing threshold as 30% spawning potential ratio, or I may also refer to it as SPR, so 30% SPR, which results in an overfishing determination for red drum. In the figure on the slide, which shows the results from the 2024 benchmark stock assessment for the southern region, values in the most recent years are below that solid black line, the threshold line, showing that overfishing is occurring. The target, which is what we're aiming for, is defined as 40% SPR, spawning potential ratio, and is that upper dashed line on the figure. When we go through the options, you'll hear me referring to 40% SPR or F40, which are the same thing, and then 30% SPR or F30, and these are the same thing as well. Lastly, in Amendment 2, it said all states within a management unit need to implement appropriate recreational bag and size limit combinations to obtain the goal or target of 40% SPR or F40. Amendment 2 actually specifies a specific method states need to use to determine what regulations attain that 40% SPR target, but it does not provide any flexibility for states to use any other method to accomplish this. That brings us to the proposed management options in draft Addendum 2. There are 5 separate issues in this addendum. When the board takes final action on the addendum, there's the opportunity to select any measure within the range of options that went up for public comment, including combining options across issues. Several of these are or could be applicable to all the states in the southern and northern regions. The only exception to this of the 5 issues in this draft management document is 3.4 Northern Region Management Options, which is limited to the northern region. First, Section 3.1 Alternative State Management Regimes, which would apply to both the northern and southern regions. This issue in the addendum directly addresses the problem I just mentioned, that states can no longer use what's in Amendment 2 to determine which regulations attain the fishing mortality goal. The Red Drum Plan Development Team, which put together this addendum, noted that the methodology in Amendment 2 is no longer considered the best available science, nor is it directly comparable to the outputs from the modern red drum assessment. Instead of Addendum 2 specifying a specific new method to determine which regulations allow states to achieve fishing mortality goal, the board has expressed interest in allowing for future flexibility by developing a process which allows states to propose changes to regulations in response to new information on the stock. As a part of this process, new methodologies to estimate the impact of regulation changes on fishing mortality could be proposed and then approved by the board. Importantly, establishing this process would allow the southern region states to be able to respond to the results of the recent benchmark assessment. One thing to reiterate or note that this issue does not specify regulation options for the southern stock states, but it describes a process that states would be able to use to propose new regulations. We always need to include a status quo option in our management documents. So in 3.1, there's option A, or red drum management would continue to be limited to what's in Amendment 2 to determine the impact of regulations on catch and fishing mortality. 3.1 option B would establish this new process to allow states in either stock to propose changes to their management measures. This process would typically occur following the acceptance of a stock assessment for management used by the board in order to end and prevent overfishing. Option B also includes language to clarify that if a state has already implemented regulations to reduce catch following the final year of an assessment, data from MRIP could be used to estimate actual realized reductions achieved to determine the impact of those regulation changes on catch. I'll briefly now run through what draft Addendum 2 lays out as the proposed process in 3.1 option B. So first, starting at the top, states would develop proposals with bag size and vessel limits using a board approved methodology to determine what regulations meet the management goal. The draft addendum provides further detail on how states within a management region can work together to achieve the goal and what sort of information would need to be in the proposal. Next, proposals would be reviewed by the Commission's Red Drum Technical Committee to ensure that the data and analysis are technically sound, basically to confirm the proposal follows the board-approved methodology. If the state wishes to gather public information within their state on the regulation options in their respective proposal, they can do that at any time in the process. It's up to the state on how they want to handle gathering public input. After TC review, proposals would be presented to and approved by the board, and then finally, states would select one of the regulation options in the proposal to implement. Next, moving on to section 3.2, allow alternative methods to estimate fishing mortality for use in management, which may apply to both the northern and southern regions, but the board will make a final decision on that of who exactly it'll apply to in October. So 3.2, allow alternative methods to estimate fishing mortality. In the draft addendum originates from a request from some of the members from the board. This issue is meant to proactively address concerns from board members that delays to future assessments may delay a state's ability to reevaluate impacts of red drum management on the stock. and/or force states to use outdated methodologies to provide management advice. Current commission guidelines found in the commission's technical committee guidance document state alternative analyses or methods to assess a stock should be submitted within the commission's assessment process. So whenever a new benchmark occurs, to be able to be considered for management use. For example, if a state completes its own assessment of the fish within their waters, or what I'll refer to as a substock, between commission assessments and finds that there has been improvements to the stock status of their substock, currently, the Commission's Red Drum Fishery Management Plan or any Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission document does not have a process to allow a state to bring forward those results to use to make adjustments to their management measures. This leads to the options for 3.2. First, option A, status quo, which follows current guidelines found in the technical committee guidance document that outside assessment should be brought forward during a commission benchmark stock assessment if a group would like their assessment to be considered for management use. Alternative assessments are subject to the same standards, documentation, and process as commission assessments, including stock assessment subcommittee, technical committee, and independent peer review. Option B would establish a process to allow for states to propose alternative methods to estimate fishing mortality between assessments and use these results to make management decisions. So I'll briefly walk through the process or pathway proposed in 3.2 option B. Starting again at the top, states would submit their methods or analyses to estimate changes in fishing mortality to the technical committee. Next, the technical committee would review the submitted analyses and make recommendations as necessary. The board also would have the ability to recommend that it be reviewed by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission Assessment Science Committee if they believe additional or independent expertise is needed. The board then would review feedback from the technical committee and the assessment science committee, if applicable, and would make a decision to approve for management use if the alternate analyses is consistent with the goals and objectives of the Red Drum Fishery Management Plan. So to bring everything together, if the analysis is approved for management use, the state would then follow a similar process to what's laid out in 3.1. The first issue we reviewed to submit proposals with new management measures and get those approved by the board. In the development of the options for this issue, the Red Drum Plan Development Team asked for input from the Red Drum Technical Committee on some important considerations for using information from a substock versus the entire stock to manage Red Drum. The Red Drum Technical Committee focused on how using information from an assessment of a substock to make changes to management could impact the stock as a whole. Different assessments conducted by different groups would not be directly comparable due to differences in how the analyses were conducted. Changes made to red drum management to a portion of the stock could lead to localized depletion of red drum in that specific area, which could have impacts on the stock as a whole. So safeguards like a formal review process would be key. Moving on to section 3.3, management program, which is the next topic in draft addendum 2. This issue originates from a motion by the board from that May 2025 meeting where the board requested that draft addendum consider a different level of fishing mortality states would need to implement regulations to not exceed. The consideration of F30 instead of the current F40. I do want to note that addressing this request would not impact the biological reference points, such as the definition of overfishing in Amendment 2. 3.3 management program provides options which specify a fishing mortality level which states would need to achieve through proposed and implemented regulations. Option A, status quo, is that states must implement an appropriate bag and size limit which attain the target 40% spawning potential ratio, or F40. Again, those two are equivalent. 3.3, option B establishes a requiring fishing mortality level of 30% SPR or F30, which states would need to achieve to end overfishing through proposed and implemented management measures with a target of decreasing fishing mortality below the fishing mortality associated with 40% spawning potential ratio, or SPR. PDT noted that if option B is selected by the board, all states in the Southern Management Region, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, would be required to implement regulations to reduce fishing mortality below the threshold of F30. To give a frame of reference of what F40% versus F30% could potentially mean for anglers and the red drum stock, wanted to lay that all out for everyone, going with option A, status quo, F40% is a more conservative approach and would decrease the probability of unsustainable harvest and further stock declines. However, it would also decrease recreational anglers' access to red drum. Option B, F30%, would increase the recreational anglers' access to red drum, but since it's a less conservative approach compared to status quo, option B would increase the probability of unsustainable harvest and further stock declines compared to status quo. Draft Addendum 2, in Appendix 1, there is a table based on the results from the 2024 benchmark assessment that shows what F30 and F40 would actually mean for the Southern region at this time, meaning what percent reduction in catch the Southern region would need to achieve for both option A, if we remain status quo with F40%, and option B, F30%. With option A, the Southern region would need to make changes to the regulations to achieve a 28.1% reduction in catch, catch being harvest and discards. With option B, the Southern region would need to make changes to achieve a 14.4% reduction in catch. On to section 3.4, Northern Region Management Options. The inclusion of this issue in the addendum stems again from the results of the 2024 benchmark assessment for the Northern region. As a reminder, although the assessment found red drum in the Northern region to not be experiencing overfishing and were not overfished, fishing mortality did appear to be increasing in recent years. In addition to this concern, the increased effort of harvest observed in the Northern region may indicate that current management is no longer conservative enough to restrain harvest to appropriate levels. Stakeholders and board members have also expressed concern with how the combination of increased abundance of red drum in recent years in the Chesapeake Bay and declining abundance of other traditional Chesapeake Bay sports fish, such as striped bass, may exacerbate or be contributing to the increasing fishing mortality on red drum. In response to these concerns, there's an interest to act preemptively and precautionarily to control fishing mortality in the Northern region. As always, the board, or I guess especially for this option, the board is not limited to selecting only one option, but can select among options. Also, I wanted to note that the reduction achieved by any proposed regulation changes in the Northern region cannot be calculated for a region as a whole due to very low sample sizes and uncertainty in the recreational data for states north of Virginia. You can find reductions achieved for various potential regulation changes in North Carolina and Virginia, however, in Appendix 2. In addition, this option focuses primarily on North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, and the Potomac River Fisheries Commission, as Delaware and New Jersey currently have comparatively minimal recreational harvest of red drum. Option A, status quo, would be no required changes to current management measures in the Northern region. 3.4, option B, considers modifications to recreational management measures in the Chesapeake states or jurisdictions specifically. Just to clarify, I say jurisdictions due to the inclusion of Potomac River Fisheries Commission. This option allows the board to select a bag limit of either 3, 2, or 1 fish per person per day, and a size limit for all 3 jurisdictions between 18 and 26 inches total length. I have the current regulations for the Chesapeake Bay jurisdictions on the slide for reference. Secondary to the concern with increasing fishing mortality, choosing option B would also align management and simplify management enforcement within the Chesapeake Bay, where bag limits range from 1 to 5 fish per person per day, and jurisdictions currently have all different maximum size limits. Next, option C, considering North Carolina's current regulation permits 1 fish per person per day from 18 to 27 inches. Any reductions to fishing mortality in the state would be most easily obtained through adjusting slot size limits. So option C is specific to North Carolina's slot limit. It would require North Carolina a selection for North Carolina's recreational slot limit between 18 and 26 inches. And currently, just as a note, North Carolina has a maximum slot size limit of 27 inches total length. Finally, the last section, section 3.5, de minimis provisions. States can request and be granted de minimis at ASMFC, which is meant to reduce the management burden for states whose measures would have a negligible effect on the conservation of a species. Currently for red drum, New Jersey and Delaware are both de minimis. In 2022, ASMFC's policy board approved an updated de minimis policy, which provided guidance on de minimis provisions for all ASMFC species. Currently, Amendment 2 for red drum does not provide any specific guidelines for evaluating whether a state should be considered de minimis, nor does it establish any measures for de minimis states. This draft addendum is an opportunity to update and establish the de minimis provisions in the red drum FMP. Red drum's Amendment 2 does not, again, provide specific guidelines for evaluating whether a state should be considered de minimis, nor does it establish a set of measures for de minimis states that would not need to change annually. The plan review team, another group within ASMFC, currently considers a state de minimis if the average total landings for the last 2 years is less than 1% of the coastwide average. Option A would maintain the status quo. 3.5 option B would update the de minimis provisions in Amendment 2 to align with the guidelines in the Commission's 2022 de minimis policy. Only 3-year averages were considered for option B, as the plan development team agreed that a 3-year average is preferable to a 2-year average when dealing with highly variable recreational data. In addition, option B considers de minimis regionally, although it has not been done that way for any commission species. The reasoning behind this is that the northern and southern regions are 2 separate stocks, so de minimis should be considered separately as well. So a state would be considered de minimis if the average total landings, commercial and recreational, for the last 3 years is less than 1% of the total landings from its respective region. Regional de minimis for red drum would, at least at this time, not impact the southern region at all, as all 3 states reliably contribute to the total landings for that region, as you can see on the pie chart on the left, which is based on the average landings for 2021 through 2023, I believe. It could potentially in the future impact the northern region, however, if you calculated de minimis for the northern states using total landings in just the northern region. States with very low sporadic landings, such as New Jersey and Delaware, might become more sensitive to changes in their landings and could potentially jump in and out of de minimis. But as you can see, there are currently so few, if any, landings of red drum in New Jersey and Delaware that they do not even appear as part of the pie chart at all. In the northern region, North Carolina and Virginia make up a majority of the total red drum landings, followed by Maryland, which is that light blue sliver. Lastly, I will just note that there is also a requirement, as I previously mentioned, that there should be specific management measures for de minimis states to provide a basic level of conservation protection for red drum, so that states that are de minimis would not need to change their regulations as often as states that do more frequently catch red drum. However, since this really isn't an issue at the moment for red drum, draft addendum 2 simply outlines the process that would be used in the future if we ever do need to establish regulations for de minimis states. You could find more information on this process in the draft addendum. That concludes the management options under consideration. And these final slides provide information on how to submit public comment on draft addendum 2. The Commission has scheduled 7 public hearings to gather public input on draft addendum 2. This table provides the dates and times for these public hearings. Please note that some of the hearings will be held virtually and some will be held in a hybrid format with both in-person and virtual options. And there is one hearing in Georgia on September 24th, which is an in-person hearing only. The full hearing schedule with registration links can be found on the Red Drum Draft Addendum 2 Action Tracker page on the Commission's website. And lastly, of note, even if you are not from a specific state for any hearing, you can still attend that hearing and provide public comment. So a link to the mentioned Red Drum Action Tracker page can be found here. In addition to information on the hearings, you can also download the draft addendum at this page, as well, in addition to finding more background information on this management action. So finally, information on the slide explains how you can submit written comments on the draft addendum. There are 3 different options available for people to submit comments. First, mail. You can mail a letter to Tracy Bauer with the address listed on the screen. You can also email using the email address comments@asmfc.org with the subject line Red Drum Draft Addendum 2, just so we can sort out your email and make sure it gets included with meeting materials. And then online at the Action Tracker page, there's a little form that you can fill out to provide your comment as well. And the deadline for public comments is 11:59 p.m. October 1st, 2025. And that concludes this presentation on Red Drum Draft Addendum 2.